Listen to this carefully. My own son drove me 6 hours from the city, pulled up to a broken-down house in the middle of nowhere, handed me $200 and said, "This is your problem now, not mine." He left me there, 73 years old, arthritic with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on my back. He thought he was dumping me somewhere I'd disappear, somewhere I'd be forgotten. But what my son didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman living next door in that equally run-down cottage was someone from my past. Someone powerful, someone who owed me a debt that was about to change everything. If you want to know who my neighbor was, what happened when she opened her door and saw me standing there, and how my son's cruelty became the catalyst for the most unexpected chapter of my life, stay with me. And please, before we begin, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Because this story is about what happens when the people who abandon you have no idea who you really are. Let's start. My name is Dorothy Walsh, and I'm 73 years old. The day my son abandoned me was a Thursday in late September, when the leaves were just starting to turn, and the air had that particular sharpness that signals the end of something. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe years if I'm being honest with myself. But mothers have an extraordinary capacity for denial when it comes to their children. We see what we want to see. We believe what we need to believe. And I'd believed, right up until the moment Stephen pulled up to that dilapidated house and told me to get out, that my son loved me. Let me back up. This story doesn't start with abandonment. It starts with choices, mine and others, that accumulated over decades like sediment, building layers of resentment and misunderstanding until the foundation cracked. I was born in 1952 in Brooklyn, New York, to Irish immigrant parents who worked themselves to exhaustion to give their children opportunities they'd never had. My father was a construction worker. My mother cleaned houses. They had 5 children, and I was the middle one, overlooked, competent, expected to be self-sufficient from an early age. I learned young that love in my family was conditional. You earned it through achievement, through not causing problems, through being useful. I got married at 22 to a man named Frank Walsh. He was handsome, charming, and fundamentally unstable in ways I didn't recognize until it was too late. We had one child together, Stephen, born when I was 24. Frank left when Stephen was 3, disappearing into the ether of irresponsible fathers who mail birthday cards sporadically and promise visits that never materialize. I raised Stephen alone. I worked as a secretary, then an office manager, eventually working my way up to administrative director at a mid-sized manufacturing company. The pay was decent. The hours were long. Stephen grew up in daycare and after-school programs, raised as much by other people's routines as by my sporadic presence. I tried. But single motherhood in the 1970s and 80s wasn't the romanticized journey of resilience it's portrayed as now. It was exhausting, isolating, and filled with guilt that gnawed at you during every moment you weren't with your child. Stephen was a difficult kid. Not bad exactly, just demanding. He needed constant attention, constant validation, constant assurance that he was special. I didn't have the bandwidth to provide that. I was too busy surviving, so he grew up feeling neglected, even though I was working myself into exhaustion for him. By the time he was a teenager, the resentment between us was palpable. "You're never around," he'd say. "I'm working to keep a roof over our heads." I'd respond, "Other kids' moms are at their games. Other kids have 2 parents." These conversations, or versions of them, repeated throughout his adolescence. He wasn't wrong. I wasn't around as much as I should have been. But I also wasn't sitting on a beach drinking margaritas. I was paying bills. I was keeping us fed. I was doing the best I could with what I had. Stephen went to college on scholarships and loans. He studied business. He got a good job at a finance company. He married a woman named Patricia, lovely, ambitious, from a wealthy family that looked at me like I was a curiosity from a different era. They had 2 children, Emma and Michael, who I saw perhaps 3 times a year at obligatory holiday gatherings. As I aged, the distance between Stephen and me grew. He moved up in his company. He bought a house in an expensive suburb. He sent his kids to private schools. His life expanded while mine contracted. I retired at 65. My pension was modest. My savings were adequate but not abundant. I lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying around me, raising my rent annually until it became untenable. At 70, I asked Stephen if I could move in with him and Patricia. "Just temporarily," I said. just until I figured out a more permanent solution. Their house had 5 bedrooms. Surely one could be mine. "Mom, that's not going to work," Stephen said over the phone. His voice had the careful patience of someone explaining reality to a child. "Patricia and I need our space. The kids need their space. We're not set up for that kind of arrangement. I'm your mother. I know. And I love you. But I also have my own family to think about. I am your family. You know what I mean." I stayed in my apartment for another 3 years, watching my savings dwindle, taking on part-time work that my arthritic hands could barely manage. I cleaned houses, ironic, given that my own mother had done the same. I babysat for neighbors. I stretched every dollar until it screamed. At 73, I couldn't make rent anymore. I called Stephen. "I need help," I said. "I can't afford my apartment. I need somewhere to stay." There was a long pause. Then, "Let me talk to Patricia." He called back 2 days later. "We found a solution," he said. "There's a property. It's in a town upstate. It's not fancy, but it's a roof over your head. We'll help you move there." "What kind of property?" "It's a small house. It needs work, but it's livable. The rent is almost nothing. We'll cover the first few months." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. But what choice did I have? The day he picked me up, I'd packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. 73 years of life reduced to containers that fit in a trunk. Stephen barely spoke during the 6-hour drive. Patricia hadn't come. Too busy, Stephen said. The kids hadn't said goodbye. We drove through increasingly rural landscapes, past towns that looked forgotten by progress, until we turned onto a dirt road that led to a cluster of houses that dilapidated would be generous to describe. These weren't quaint country cottages. These were structures held together by habit and stubbornness, with peeling paint, sagging porches, and the unmistakable air of neglect. Stephen pulled up to one of them, a small, single-story house with broken shutters and a yard overtaken by weeds. "This is it," he said. I stared. "This is where you're leaving me?" "It's what we could afford, Mom. The landlord said it's structurally sound. It just needs cosmetic work." "Stephen, this place looks abandoned." "It's not. There's electricity. There's water. It's fine." He helped me carry my boxes inside. The interior was as grim as the exterior suggested. Stained carpet, water damage on the ceiling, a kitchenette with appliances from the 1970s. There was a couch that smelled like mildew, a bed with a mattress I wouldn't trust, and windows so dirty I could barely see through them. "I can't live here," I said, my voice breaking. "You'll make it work." "You always do." Stephen pulled out his wallet and handed me $200. "This should cover groceries for a while." "I'll send money when I can." "When you can?" "Mom, I have my own expenses. Patricia's car needs fixing. Emma's tuition is due. I'm doing what I can." "You're abandoning me." His face hardened. "I'm helping you. You'd be homeless otherwise. This is me taking responsibility. This is you dumping me somewhere I can't inconvenience you anymore. Think whatever you want." I have to get back, and just like that he left. I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the dirt road, and I understood with absolute clarity that my son had written me off. I was a problem he'd solved by removing me from his immediate environment. I spent the first hour sitting on that mildewed couch, crying. Then I got up, because crying doesn't fix anything, and started assessing my situation. The house was worse than I'd initially thought. The toilet barely flushed. The shower had no hot water. The refrigerator hummed ominously. But it was 4 walls and a roof, which was more than I'd have otherwise. I was unpacking my first box when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a woman about my age standing on the porch. She was black, with silver hair and locks pulled back, wearing paint-stained overalls and a curious expression. "You're the new neighbor?" she asked. "I guess I am. I'm Clara. I live next door." She gestured to the equally run-down cottage about 50 yards away. "Saw someone moving in. Wanted to introduce myself." "Dorothy," I said. "Dorothy Walsh." Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. "Walsh? Dorothy Walsh from Brooklyn?" I stared at her. Then recognition hit me like a freight train. "Clara Jennings?" "It's Clara Jennings Morrison now. But yes, Jesus Christ, Dorothy. What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak for a moment. Clara Jennings. I hadn't seen her in over 40 years. We'd worked together at the manufacturing company in the early 1980s. She'd been a floor manager. I'd been moving into administration. We'd been friends, or as close to friends as two women navigating a male-dominated workplace could be. She'd been brilliant, ambitious, constantly fighting against the racism and sexism that tried to keep her in her place, and then she'd disappeared. One day she was there, the next she was gone. Rumor was she'd been fired for insubordination. Another rumor said she'd quit to pursue something else. I'd tried to find her, but this was before social media, before easy ways to track people down. Eventually, I'd assumed she'd moved on to bigger and better things. I could ask you the same question, I finally said. What are you doing here? Living, surviving, come have tea. You look like you need it. Clara's house was in marginally better condition than mine, still dilapidated, but with signs of ongoing repair and care. The inside was warm, cluttered with books and art supplies, smelling like paint and coffee and something baking. She made tea while I sat at her kitchen table, still processing the impossibility of this reunion. Talk, she said, setting a mug in front of me. How did you end up here? I told her everything. The retirement, the dwindling savings, asking Stephen for help, the 6-hour drive to this forgotten place, the $200 and the promise of rent money when he could. Clara's expression grew darker with each sentence. Your son abandoned you here. He says he's helping me. He's warehousing you, getting you out of sight so he doesn't have to deal with the guilt of seeing you struggle. That's harsh. It's true. I know because my daughter did the same thing to me. I looked at her in surprise. You have a daughter? Had, past tense. She decided 15 years ago that having a mother who'd been fired from her job for causing trouble, her words, was an embarrassment. She changed her name, moved to California, and hasn't spoken to me since. I'm sorry. Don't be. I've made peace with it. But I see in you what I saw in myself back then. This desperate need to believe that your child still loves you, that this is temporary, that they'll come around. They won't, Dorothy. Not unless something fundamental changes. We talked for hours that first day. Clara told me her story, how she'd been fired from the manufacturing company after reporting sexual harassment, how she'd spent years fighting the decision in court, how she'd eventually won a settlement that should have set her up for life, but was eaten up by legal fees and bad investments, how she'd ended up in this forgotten corner of nowhere because the rent was cheap and no one bothered her. But I'm not just surviving, she said. I'm painting. I'm writing. I'm living on my own terms. I don't have much, but what I have is mine. I don't know how to do that, I admitted. Live on my own terms. I've spent my whole life taking care of other people. Then it's time to learn. Over the next weeks, Clara became my lifeline. She helped me clean the house, showed me how to fix the basic plumbing, taught me which corners I could cut and which required investment. She shared food when my $200 ran out and Stephen's rent money never materialized. She introduced me to the handful of other people living in this forgotten village, mostly older folks, mostly people who'd been left behind by progress or family or both. I tried calling Stephen multiple times. He never answered. I left voicemails. No response. I sent texts. They went unread. After 3 weeks, I called Patricia directly. Dorothy, Stephen doesn't want to talk to you right now, she said, her voice clipped. Why? He feels like you're not appreciating what he did for you. He found you a place to live. He dumped me in a broken house in the middle of nowhere. That's dramatic. He's doing his best. You need to understand that he has his own life, his own priorities. I'm his mother. And he's my husband. I need you to stop calling. She hung up. I told Clara about the conversation that night. She didn't look surprised. They've decided you're the problem, she said. It's easier than admitting they've failed you. So what do? You live. Without them. You build a life here that doesn't require their permission or their money. It sounded impossible. But over the following months, it became less impossible. I got a part-time job at the local library, minimum wage but enough combined with my small pension to cover basics. Clara and I bartered skills. I helped her organize her finances and apply for grants for her art. She taught me to paint and how to see beauty in deterioration. The village, I learned, was full of people like us. People who'd been forgotten, abandoned, or had chosen to disappear. There was Margaret, a former lawyer who'd walked away from a career that was destroying her. There was James, a Vietnam vet whose PTSD had cost him his family. There was Yolanda, a transgender woman who'd fled a community that wouldn't accept her. We were the discarded, the inconvenient, the too complicated to deal with, but we were also building something. A community not based on blood but on choice. We helped each other fix roofs, shared meals, celebrated small victories. Clara started an art collective, teaching painting to anyone interested. I helped organize a book club. James started a garden that fed half the village. For the first time in decades, I felt seen. Not as someone's mother, someone's employee, someone's burden. Just as Dorothy, a woman with thoughts and skills and value independent of her relationship to anyone else. A year after Stephen abandoned me, Clara got a call. It was from a gallery in New York City. They'd seen photos of her work online, posted by one of the younger residents of the village who'd been helping her create a digital presence, and they wanted to feature her in a group show. "This is huge," I told her. "This could change everything. It's just one show. It's recognition. It's visibility." The show opened in February, and I took a bus 12 hours to attend. Clara's paintings, large, abstract pieces that somehow captured the isolation and beauty of our forgotten village, were stunning. The gallery was packed. Critics were interested. By the end of the night, she'd sold 3 pieces and had 2 commissions lined up. I stood there watching her, my friend who'd been discarded just like me, being celebrated, being seen, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. 3 months later, a journalist came to the village. She'd read about Clara's work and wanted to do a profile about the artist living in America's forgotten places. She interviewed Clara, but she also interviewed the rest of us. She asked about how we'd ended up here. She asked about our lives before. She listened. The article came out in June. It went viral. Suddenly, our forgotten village wasn't forgotten anymore. People were sharing the story on social media, talking about elder abandonment, about communities that form in the margins, about resilience and redefinition. And that's when my phone rang. It was Stephen. "Mom, I saw the article. I didn't say anything. I didn't know that you were doing all that. The library, the book club. You look happy in the photos." "I am happy. I'm glad. Listen, Patricia and I were talking. We think maybe you should come visit. The kids ask about you?" "No." "What?" "No, Stephen. I'm not coming to visit so you can feel better about abandoning me. I'm not performing reconciliation so you can pretend you're a good son. That's not fair. You left me in a broken house with $200 and disappeared. You wouldn't take my calls. You told your wife to tell me to stop calling. You wrote me off. I was overwhelmed, so was I, and I figured it out. Without you." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry. Maybe you are. But sorry doesn't undo a year of abandonment. Sorry doesn't give me back the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if you'd ever care that I was alive. I always cared. You cared when it was convenient. When I became inconvenient, you made me disappear. And now that I'm in the news, now that people might judge you for abandoning me, suddenly you care again. That's not... Yes, it is. And I'm done. I'm done being the mother who makes herself small so you can feel big. I'm done apologizing for needing help. I'm done." I hung up. Clara, who'd been listening from her porch, came over. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said. And I meant it. Stephen called twice more over the next month. I didn't answer. He sent a check for $5,000 with a note. "I'm sorry. I should have done better." I donated the money to the village collective we'd formed to help people with housing repairs. The journalist came back. She wanted to do a follow-up about what had happened since her article published. She interviewed me this time, asking about Stephen, about abandonment, about rebuilding. "What would you say to other people in similar situations?" she asked. "I'd say you're not the problem. And you don't need permission from the people who hurt you to build a new life. You just need to start building." That article went viral too. I started getting letters from other elders who'd been abandoned, who felt invisible, who needed to know they weren't alone. I answered everyone. 2 years after Stephen abandoned me, Clara and I were featured in a documentary about elder abandonment and intentional communities. The filmmaker had found us through the articles, and she'd spent 6 months in the village documenting our lives. The film premiered at a major festival. It won awards. Suddenly, we weren't just survivors. We were symbols of something larger, a different way of aging, of living, of defining family. Stephen watched the documentary. He called me afterward. "I don't know what to say," he said. "Then don't say anything. I want to try again. With us, I want to know you. Why? Because I'm famous now? Because abandoning me publicly is embarrassing? Because I realized I don't actually know my mother. I know the woman who raised me, who worked constantly, who I resented. But I don't know you. The woman who paints, who builds community, who chose to thrive instead of disappear. That's all the same woman, Stephen. You just never bothered to look. I know. And I'm sorry. But I want to change that. If you'll let me, I was quiet for a long time. Clara, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand. What do you need? She whispered. I thought about it. What did I need? Not an apology, though Stephen owed me that. Not money. I'd figured out how to survive without it. What I needed was honesty. Recognition that what he'd done was wrong, not an unfortunate circumstance. I need you to understand that you didn't just leave me somewhere inconvenient, I finally said. You left me to die. You put me in a place where you thought I'd disappear, where you wouldn't have to see me struggle. And when I didn't disappear, when I found a way to live anyway, you got uncomfortable with the reminder that I survived without you. You're right. I need you to understand that I don't need you anymore. I have a community here. I have friends. I have a life that has nothing to do with being your mother. I understand. And I need you to understand that if we rebuild a relationship, it will be on different terms. I'm not the woman you can call when you need something and ignore when you don't. I'm not the mother who will shrink herself so you can feel comfortable. I'm done with that version of us. What version do you want? I want us to be honest. I want you to see me as a whole person, not just as the woman who gave birth to you. And I want you to do the work to earn my trust back. Not through money or grand gestures. Through consistency, through showing up. I can do that. We'll see. Stephen started visiting. At first, it was awkward. He'd drive up once a month, stay for an afternoon, and we'd talk carefully, avoiding the difficult subjects. But slowly over the next year, the conversations got realer. He apologized for specific things, for the $200, for not answering my calls, for telling Patricia to shut me out. He listened when I told him how scared I'd been, how alone, how his abandonment had confirmed every fear I'd had about being worthless. He met Clara. He met James and Margaret and Yolanda. He saw the community I'd built, the life I'd created from nothing. I don't know if I've ever been this proud of you, he said during one visit. You should have been proud before, when I was working 3 jobs to keep us fed, when I was showing up even when I was exhausted. Your pride shouldn't require me to be exceptional. It should exist because I'm your mother and I tried. You're right. Patricia came with him eventually. She was stiff at first, clearly uncomfortable with the humble surroundings, with the reality of where her husband had left his mother. But she softened when she saw how I lived, who I'd become. I judged you, she admitted one afternoon. I thought you were a burden. I thought you'd make Stephen's life harder. I'm sorry, I forgive you. But understand that forgiveness doesn't mean I'm forgetting. I'm just choosing not to carry the anger anymore. My grandchildren came to visit when they were older. Emma was 22, Michael was 19. They'd been told a sanitized version of events. And seeing the reality was jarring for them. Dad said you lived in a small house upstate, Emma said, looking around at the still humble but now vibrant community. He made it sound like a choice. It became a choice, I said. But it started as abandonment. Why didn't you tell us? Your father made sure I couldn't. And I didn't want to force you to choose between believing him and believing me. They stayed for a week. They met my community. They saw my paintings. I'd started creating too, under Clara's tutelage. They saw that I was whole, happy, living without needing their family's validation. Grandma, Michael said before they left, I don't think I've ever seen someone remake their life like this. It's kind of badass, I laughed. Language, but thank you. Seriously. You were left with nothing and you built everything. I was left with myself. That turned out to be enough. Now, at 75, I live in the same dilapidated house Stephen left me in. But it's not dilapidated anymore. The community came together to fix it up. New roof, repaired plumbing, fresh paint. It's small and simple, but it's mine. Clara lives next door. We paint together most mornings. We've both had gallery shows now, small ones, but meaningful. We're working on a book together about aging, community, and choosing to thrive. Stephen visits regularly. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's honest. He knows that I don't need him the way I used to. That liberation has paradoxically made our relationship better. My son abandoned me in a suburban village near a dilapidated house. He had no idea who my neighbor was. He had no idea that leaving me there would be the catalyst for the most authentic chapter of my life. He had no idea that the woman he was discarding would become someone he'd eventually be proud of. But more importantly, I had no idea. I had no idea that being abandoned could be liberation. That the worst thing that ever happened to me would also be the best thing. That losing everything would teach me I never needed it in the first place. If you've been abandoned, discarded, told you're a burden, please know, you are not the end of your story. You are the beginning of something else entirely. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Stories about people who refused to disappear, who built lives from nothing, who discovered that being forgotten by some people means being found by the right ones. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Thank you for witnessing this story. That might not seem like much, but after years of being invisible, being seen is everything.